Hi, welcome to Artists, Authors, and Entrepreneurs. I'm Signe Miranda from the Creative Leaders, and today I'm interviewing Tim Blunt, who's a rock singer, songwriter, producer, and he also works in the music industry. Welcome, Tim. Thank you.
Oh yeah,
Fantastic. How are you doing today?
excellent.
And I see you're in your studio.
Yeah, I'm just hanging out down here when I can. Gets rather tricky to cut time for creative time in life as we move along. Um, as I'm going to mention in some of your questions coming up here.
Awesome. So, first, I'd like to ask you how you got into songwriting and when you started writing songs.
Well, um, my father was a professional jazz musician all of his life, so I was around music and instruments were always around the house. And I just started picking up an instrument that was lying around and started playing. And then what came natural to me was always formulating melodies. So the writing process was actually one of the first ones that actually ever came to me. Some people try copying other artists. The copying came later. I started doing my own stuff right away, and as I developed, I started on drums, and then I moved to guitar, and so groove was always a thing in me already. So when I kept hearing these, not voices, voices in my head, but I hear complete songs in my head sometimes, like much to the dismay of drummers and other band members, because when I did start to get bands together, I would have complete ideas in my head already. So it made it really tough because I heard the groove how I wanted it to be. And you know what I mean? The counter melodies. Anyway, so started very early.
So, that probably comes in quite handy when you're producing other artists as well.
Oh yeah, totally. And that makes it really difficult too for some. I find some artists that haven't quite developed their writing chops can somewhat be very take it personally when there's comments or critique or adjustments to be made in their babies. When somebody's telling you that the chorus kind of sucks. Don't use those words, but when you're saying these things to some artists, they really get offended by it. And I've worked with a couple of people that I've made, tried to constructively criticize things for the betterment of the song, and it's always for the betterment of the song, right? Yeah, in my mind, and therefore we didn't work anymore together. It was not a terrible argument or anything. They just drift away.
Yeah, it can be quite a challenge as an artist to get opinions about the songs and
Yeah,
to be able to take that and make the song even better.
and I think what it is it comes to a combination, and this is what a lot of artists, when they're working with a producer or songwriter, it's all about the relationship. You know, if you don't have the relationship with someone where you can actually kind of in a sense drop your guard, you know what I mean, and move forward through those things. And when somebody says, "Hey, I'm not really digging that verse," you don't get offended by it. You go, "Okay, well, what can we do? What are you feeling?" And you move like that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you're working on a project and you want the project to be the best it can be.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, without egos, you got to be able to drop the ego, internal ego, and to get on to the real crux of songwriting.
Yeah, and I think that can be a challenge for a lot of artists because the songs are so close to them.
Yeah, yeah. Sometimes get a little too, we're a little too buried in our own thoughts sometimes, and you know, I had that had a heavy rock band in the late '70s, early '80s, and we got some interest from a producer, and he came into our rehearsals and started telling us about meter. Well, we'd never had that comment before, maybe except my dad commenting after hearing rehearsals. But the guy came in and was right on about the drummer and bass player, and they took great offense because they really thought they were just playing it perfectly.
Yeah.
In my mind, I was like open to learning. I wanted to know, what is this thing we call meter, and they're like, well, I don't want to sound like a robot. Well, it's not about robot. It's about honing your craft, right? Learning your craft.
Absolutely.
Will have solid meter, and they can drift in and out of the groove a bit without sounding like a robot. They can still be on the mark. And anyway, I might be digressing a little here.
Oh, that's quite all right. So I'd like to bring it back to what inspires you as a songwriter. Are there artists who've inspired you? Are there situations that inspire you?
So many. Um, you know, uh, I get inspired quite a bit. My problem is getting private time for writing. Um, and this is something I've heard other quite large artists say the problem is getting time to create. But I get inspired by so many different artists. When I was younger, it was Frank Zappa, believe it or not, Bowie, and all the greats. But I sometimes hesitate to say what inspires me or what artists, because there's so many from so many genres that I say it's whatever comes to mind. Like if you listen to some of the stuff on my Broad Jam account there, you'll see I've got stuff ranging from soft melodic instrumentals to orchestral stuff to hard rock. So without pigeonholing, I get inspired by many things, and it's all of the moment.
Yeah, I noticed the variety when I was listening to your music. And I'm wondering also, in terms of themes, do stories pop into your head, or is it more from personal life or from things that you see in your life, or do you create stories for your songs?
Well, lyrical content has been a struggle for me, as I tend to overanalyze myself. So some of my stuff has my own lyrics. I used to work with a lyricist or a poet, where I would take his ideas, and we would mold them into song. So some of my stuff is done from working with a poet/lyricist.
Awesome.
Elton John, Bernie Taupin. I can sit in 2 seconds and come up with a new idea, which I did just before this video interview started. I came up with a new idea on the piano. It came out of my head like nothing, and I started to hear the counter melodies. So that wasn't even intentional inspiration. It's just sit down and let the melody flow.
Awesome. And besides having your own production studio and working with other artists, you've worked as a production manager and a tour manager. Can you tell us a little bit about how you got into that?
Yeah, well, here we go again. Back to Dad. He was an electronics geek too. Built his own amplifiers and wound his own pickups and fixed TVs. So I was always around electronics. So as I got older too, I started rewiring my own amplifiers and doing sound recording. When we had our bands, we'd go rent some stuff from Long and McQuaid and start to learn the recording process and how do we make those sounds sound like the records that we love. So I started really getting a curiosity about that, and then started just recording, and guys in other bands knew I kind of had technical aptitude. So I started getting offered, hey, can you come and mix our band? And I'd go, and I was very green. But I'd give her. I'd go and I'd try, and sometimes the first results were not all the greatest. But as time went, I hooked up back in the days when there used to be club bands that used to tour by the week. I hooked up doing sound for a local club band we went for 6-8 months at a time and played every little dive bar across BC, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, and really got my feet wet there. And then that was kind of got tired of being on the road in not so good conditions, living in the back of a truck, in a van, doing it every day, living in flea bag motels and stuff. Came home, got a job, and figured, gee, I know how to do electronics, and and went and got several regular jobs. Actually, ended up working as a studio manager for Little Mountain Studios when it was around near the end of its term. And then I went and applied at a sound company. I was out of work. And I'm like, what am I going to do? Well, let's go do this sound thing. And so I started doing that. Worked as an operations manager, putting PA systems together for shows and festivals. And then one day a fella got into the movie industry and he was leaving a job with a recording act. And he knew I played instruments. And he said, hey, do you want to go on the road as a backline guy? I've never done that before.
Cool.
Or I could say, oh, I don't know. He'd already been on the phone and dropped my name. And so I started working with Spirit of the West as my first touring act with a recording artist. And that's what launched me into actual touring. I went and did it and gave 110%. And, some notice was taken. And that got me moved up to, got an offer to go work with, I worked with Michelle Wright for a while, a country artist, and then got offered Colin James in 1994. Started with him, and to this day still work with him.
Awesome.
As his tour manager and guitar tech.
And how do you balance working in the industry and being an artist as well?
Well, that's a really the tough one right now for me. It's something I struggle with daily, actually. I have landed some benefit working with the artists because I do play multiple instruments. I have been able to actually get to perform with artists. With Colin James, for instance, he does a up close and intimate show. And in my guitar world, I'm actually play bass in there, on shows. So, that really gets part of my performing itch out. But as far as my personal writing, have so many ideas and that on the burner that I've, tour managing, this is where it kind of starts to take over. When you start to tour manage and be responsible for a recording artist that's got a lot of aspects to deal with, everything from booking hotels, flights, to cargo and, the advancing shows, it starts to pull your time,
Yeah.
And as we get older too, life starts to interfere, and it gets in the way. Daniel Lanois, I was watching an interview with him, and he spoke of how to balance. And he said he gets up at 5 or 6 in the morning before the phones start to ring, and that's his creative time, because he says it's really a challenge to find time for creativity in life as we move along. I remember when I was 18 and 20, that's all I did. I just lived and breathed. I wasn't married. I didn't have a house. I didn't have anything. No responsibilities. Didn't even own a car. Lived in my parents' house, and my parents said, hey, use the basement for the studio. So, I think back to that, oh my God, if I could have that kind of creative time again, it would be amazing. But the responsibilities of life kind of come in on us, and we've got bills to pay. And so reading some books on the creative structure or how to be creative, there's somewhat of a pyramid involved in the creative process now. And the bottom of the pyramid is how do we pay our bills and get our food and our structure of our life first before we get time to creative. The creative of it tends to be at the peak of the pyramid. So it's challenging, back to what you're saying, how do you balance? Because, the balance of keeping the income going, taking care of, making sure my plumbing in my house is still functioning and the grass is mowed and, things are maintained in your life before you can actually come down here and spend this free time. So balance, big challenge.
Absolutely. And my last question is, do you have any fun or interesting tour stories that you can share with us?
Well, there's so many. I mean, being fortunate to actually have the life I've got touring and stuff. A lot of good times, you know. Went to Israel. We did a thing for the Canadian Forces, you know, over there, and that was quite an experience, going to Palestine and stuff like that, and seeing a lot of the globe, you know. Touring extensively in my time when I worked with Chris Isaac as his production manager. Spent lots of time in Australia and stories. What can I say? Oh boy, you know, I remember being thrown down the middle of the bus one time when a bus driver in the middle of the night was driving, and I was standing there brushing my teeth before going to the bunk, and he slammed on the brakes, and I went about 8 feet in the air down into the front of the bus, and where the driver's bay is. That was kind of scary.
Wow.
Yeah, so some scary times, some fun times and rough times, bad weather, doing gigs out in storm conditions, and had some great times lately. We've been doing a couple of these things called the Legendary Rhythm and Blues Cruises, which are chartered ships out of the States that take on about 30 different bands, and you go on these ships, and so it's almost like a bit of a holiday, and you're setting up like a festival out on the deck, the pool deck, and so that's fun too. I mean, stories, I don't really know. There's been numerous times when I worked with Bare Naked Ladies, Stephen Page there was having his first child, and we were in Atlanta, Georgia, doing an arena down there, and they couldn't. He had to fly. He flew home immediately and bailed, and so they came to me and said, "Hey, can you cover some guitar?" So I'm like, "Sure." So it was pretty nerve-wracking. Had to go up and play in front of, I don't know what it was, 30,000 people or something like that. And, I'm just the guitar tech, but went up and did it. So yeah, there's been some opportunities. Worked on the Chris Isaac TV show there, and got placed on the show a couple times.
Awesome.
Just by being in proxy of things, and having abilities. Sometimes you just get the opportunity to step up, and new opportunities kind of fall into your lap.
Awesome, great. Well, thank you so much for your time, and everyone can check out your music on Broad Jam. I'll put a link with this interview, and I'd like to thank you again. This has been an interview with Tim Blunt. I'm Signe Miranda for the Creative Leaders, and signing out for artists, authors, and entrepreneurs.
Well, take care.